Hi, I'm so excited about this episode of The Interrupted Path because we've got someone so interesting today. And before we delve into their story, I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves and to give us a really brief CV. Do you want to go?
Hello. Well, I'm George Murphy. CV wise is tricky because I've had a few over the years to fill in the gaps of things I've done. I left school at 15 and I went to work for a big jeweler in retail for about a year. After that, I did a lot of temping before becoming an actor, which means I worked a lot less because work's harder to come by, and my CV changed, and so I had to have two CVs: one for when I was going to get jobs doing various bits and pieces, and one for being an actor, and both completely contradicted each other because one said I'd never been out of work as an actor, and the other one said I'd never been out of work in whatever role I was going to. And I sort of had varying degrees of that before my best friend moved for a couple of years to Australia and kept on writing to me saying, you have to come, you have to come, you have to come. So I moved there for about 18 months and ended up traveling the world as part of that. Came back with no money and did various jobs and more acting. Then I decided that I just really wanted my own place to live, so I ended up buying my first flat, and I got a sort of more managerial job, which could afford me to get a mortgage. Then I just once I got the mortgage, I hated the job, so I left that. I was doing infomercials for them, these 1 hour infomercials for this particular company. Then I moved to Canada, and the flat had doubled in value in that time. So when I moved to Canada, I bought a place there. And then when I came back to the UK, I ended up sort of buying more and more property because the property in Canada did very, very well. And I ended up being a property investor, which is pretty much what I do full time for a living now.
Yeah. It sounds like you kind of fell into that by accident. It wasn't like a planned thing, which of course, you know, on this series, that's what we're really interested in, what's planned and what's not planned. And, you know, I think already what you're saying is so fascinating, but I'm really interested in how come you left school at 15, because I think we're around the same age. So leaving school at 15 is unusual. I wouldn't have been able to do that. But before we get to that point, I want to go back a bit further and find out what growing up was like for you. What was your childhood like?
It's pretty good. I mean, I grew up in Harrow, very sort of middle class suburbia, I'd say. My mum's from Portugal. My dad was English. My mum, for the first few years of my life, was a housewife, and my dad was a chartered accountant. And it sort of swapped when I was in my sort of early teens, I guess, in that my dad started his own business and, you know, had some very sort of decided to get very prestigious offices in Jermyn Street in London. But I don't think the business did fantastically well. And so he moved it back to the Home Office and pretty much just retired. While Mum, who was always a fantastic cook, went into catering, and then she ran she ran the what would you call it, the restaurant at Debenhams in Harrow, and then she ran Harrow Crown Courts, the restaurant there, and you know did pretty well in the catering field. But yeah, I'd say for the most part it was pretty good upbringing, you know, pretty stable.
Yeah.
upbringing.
Yeah, it sounds like it was stable and loving. And how did that compare to your school experience? What was it like going to school?
It was all right. So I was born in late August. So I was, wherever I went, I was the youngest in my year.
Yeah.
So, you know, there were kids I went to school with who had birthdays in early September, who were virtually a year older than I was. But, you know, you don't think of these things when you're that age. And I'm very tall as well. So
Yeah, you are, George. How tall are you?
I'm 6'4", so people don't think of me as, particularly as children, you don't think of you as being young when you're
tall.
Yeah.
The contrast. My brother that used to happen to him. He was really tall, and he'd always sort of get picked on or stuff because people think he's really tall, but he was the youngest as well.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, so it's a funny thing, but it wasn't something I really thought about at the time. Occasionally, you get the odd comment, you know, and I remember a teacher going through the register. He's like, "Oh, you are much young," you know. He was treating me or giving me grief for not being as good scholastically as perhaps I should be. And I remember his face, sort of a realization that I was quite young. But I moved schools a lot when I was younger because we lived in the house I originally grew up in was in North Harrow.
Right.
I think my dad did pretty well, and so moved to a bigger house in sort of more central Harrow, and that meant moving schools. I think we went out of the catchment area, so I had to go to a different school. But I haven't got too many memories of that. But I remember, you know, my parents being concerned. It was pretty rough, you know. It probably was, to be fair, but. So they moved me to another school. So in junior school, I had 3 schools within the space of a couple of years, which I think would probably have a detrimental effect on learning at that age. But I've never. It's funny. I've always felt school's something I had to get through. I never, you know, I enjoyed playing with my friends. I enjoyed, you know, all that part of it. But lessons was, you know, can I get away with it? Can I get away with, you know?
Yeah. And also, I think if you were one of the youngest in the class, but you know, you only have to have a child to see the difference between, like, you know, a child that's newborn and a 1-year-old, and see how different that development is. And I know it picks up, but there is a big difference in those months.
Yeah, the younger you are, I mean, it's funny, isn't it, that the older we get, a year means nothing, you know. But even when you're sort of 15, 16, you know, if you see someone 20 years old, the gap it's a huge chasm. Like, you know, it feels like a lifetime away, you know, but then you get into your 30s, 4 years is nothing. You know? It's but so I think the younger you are, the more even seeing it with my daughter now, you know, there's a difference to the way she interacts with 6 and 7 year olds, and, you know, 2 and 3 year olds. You know, it's.
So at primary school, you'd sort of had this experience of being the youngest, not really aware of it, and knowing that you really like playing with your friends, moving schools a few times, which and kind of, did you have a sense there that you didn't particularly enjoy being in the classroom, or were you just sort of, it was just going with the flow? You were moving from one school to another, and
I think at that point, you know, you're quite resilient. Certainly the first couple of days, I remember going into the 3rd school, you know, the one I ended up in, and they had this book, you know, which everyone, I guess it had all the subjects in, and, you know, you're on whatever page, and depending on your level, depending on what page you're at, you know, and so I started at page 4, you know, with the beginning page 5 or whatever it is after the prefaces, and I remember a little girl just came up to me, "What page are you on?" I was like, "I'm on page 4." It's like, I'm on page 56.
Yeah.
On my first day, so it's I was expected literally to start from the beginning, where everyone's obviously been working a while.
It's a really strong moment, that is. Actually, it's a really powerful moment, that moment where you look at something and realize you're not where everyone else is. Because I learned to read very late, and I remember not being able to read. I remember that, and I remember like looking at other people and thinking, how are they more ahead? And it really forms something in your mind, doesn't it? That memory that actually I'm not where I'm meant to be.
It affects me to this day, actually. Well, I say to this day, I don't act so much anymore, but I was always interested in acting, even from that sort of age, from the 6 or 7 or whatever it was. And so I was always keen on being in the school play. But I couldn't read properly, So they'd give me a few lines. And I remember they were doing one story, and there was this little boy, who was just excelled at everything. He was a star pupil. And so he said, I want to be the lead in the play. And, they asked me what part did I want, and I said, well, I want to be the lead in the play. And the teacher said, well, James is going up for this, don't you? But I think my performance was okay, but my reading was terrible. But I think I was so keen to do it, I got over it a bit. And I remember the teacher saying, that was actually quite good. It was like, obviously you can't do it because James is going to have to do the part, but we'll have you as his sort of backup, as his but that was the first instance, but I remember one teacher sort of really bullying me just to read something in front of a class. I just couldn't. I kept on clearing my throat. Every time I go for an audition, this is probably a detriment to my acting career. I'm very happy if I've just been able to read it and not stumble on it, or the same nerves about reading in front of the class, sort of, to this day. Even reading the stories to my daughter now. If Harriet comes into the room, as a Cambridge graduate, it's just. It's a funny thing. I struggle to read with someone looking over my shoulder, and it's the same with an audition process. With someone reading a script, oh no, you missed, you didn't say that word correctly.
Yeah.
On TV sets, there's often a person with a script, literally going word for word, making sure you say them all, because it's around with the writer's words. Yeah.
I think it sounds. That early experience of realizing that you're not able to do something because you're not considered academic enough or reading enough. But is it for you? What's really interesting is that came at the same time as where you were able to show that actually I can act. Actually, I'm really good at performance, and bringing those two together. I imagine you would have had to work out how you show that, how you make people aware of that.
Yeah, it's funny. I was supported by my parents in that respect, in that they put me into a stage school, which was really highly regarded within the area and beyond. People travel to take their children 20, 30 miles, to take them to this stage school. And I learned obviously a lot about acting there. But at school, I just, and this is ego for you. When I went to high school, I didn't choose drama as an option because I just felt there was not much they could teach me, Whereas in retrospect, it would be something that I could actually get a qualification in. I could actually ace something, But there was still quite a lot, a written element to it, which and if I think back to taking my GCSEs at 15, my spelling would have been appalling. My handwriting would have been terrible. I would struggle to read to that extent. You know, it's
Yeah.
so yeah. I don't know. I don't know what a difference a year would have made. Some perhaps, you know, but yeah, it's tricky. It's difficult, particularly when you didn't know it at the time. I mean, nothing was recognised at the time. When I went to high school, it was Whitmore was quite unique, I think, at the time, because they tried to encompass everybody. You know, they had children with some, looking back, some pretty severe disabilities, which, you know, you'd think would have a separate school to cater for them. You know, because but they had, you know, all across the spectrum of ability. I mean, I'm pretty sure you had kids that couldn't properly communicate, you know, that had various conditions and what have you, and they were integrated with everyone else. Now, if you had learning difficulties, you went to this room called C5, you know, and it was, in kids being kids, you know, they just really took the mick out of anyone that went there. But I was never, as bad as my grades were, I was never sent there. So I never really got any special help or attention, because I guess there were people that really had severe learning difficulties, you know, and but yeah, so it's not. But you know, you've got 1,000 children in high school, you know. So I think it's easy to be missed off, you know. But
yeah, I think that's true. But I think you know, it's difficult when you're not bad enough. But clearly, you knew there was something going on, because you were, you know, you'd gone from primary, now you're in secondary. You're not doing the thing that you really love, which is the drama. And I, in a way, I know you're saying it was ego, but sometimes we protect the thing that we really love, because maybe school changes it or other people change it. So that's still yours. But when you're in school, it sounds like you're starting to become aware that you're not where you're meant to be with the class academically. Like, your reading, your saying was a problem, your writing was a problem, but nobody's picking up on this. What did you think of yourself as a learner at that point?
I just thought, I think there was a question to just work harder. You're not working hard. You know, I think that was what came back again and again. I mean, to be fair, there were certain subjects like maths. I was all right at. I mean, to this day, I always think of myself as a numbers person. You know, it's maths hasn't really been a problem for me, and it meant I didn't. You know, there were 3 groups. You know, and I was in the middle group, so I wasn't excelling at it. But I was competent. You know, I think that was, everyone was happy with my level there. Languages, on the other hand, I just never had an interest, you know. So I was, I was in, you know, classes like home economics or needlework or I just had no interest. So I was failing even more on those subjects, you know.
Yeah, I think I find it quite funny or ironic in that you would have stood out, George, whether you would have wanted to or not, because you're so tall. And then you were doing everything you could to hide at the same time. Like, you
well, that's right. My dad told me a story about when he was growing up. He never really learned to swim properly, because I think he was afraid of the water or something. So he used to go to the swimming pool with you know, with his school, dip his head in the water to make his hair all wet, and just sort of hide in the changing room, so it looked like he had been swimming when he hadn't, you know. And he would have been very, very tall. But it's just,
I love that. I love that. I think that's how many of us at school put up pretenses of being really busy, like dipping our head in the water, so to fool people, so we can just be left alone and get on with it. I mean, that's
exactly right.
That's a good example of what we all do to some extent.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, just don't want to be noticed. I think that was virtually every class. Don't be noticed. Don't be. Hopefully it'll end in an hour. I mean, it's so funny. You know, I think classes were 40, 50 minutes. You know, they just felt like they went on for days. You know, and it was just getting through it. When's playtime? When's the running around and messing around bit? It was. And also, typically I didn't or couldn't do my homework. So will I get away with that? Will they?
Will I get caught? But I think how you describe yourself as being dyslexic, that's what you say. You understand that you are dyslexic.
I do now. I don't think I knew what that word was. I don't know. I don't think that word was in my vocabulary at that age. It was only much later. I started to read about it and some of the traits of it. I thought, well, yeah, I've got that, but not that. And then I thought, I couldn't be properly dyslexic because I haven't got all these traits. And then there was a course at the Actors Centre. We do a one-on-one to sort of see if you are dyslexic, and it's not a. I should clarify to actually be diagnosed dyslexic is an expensive process. I think it's £3,000 or £4,000. So I didn't go to get the certificates. But
being a numbers person, you knew that was expensive.
Yeah, well, exactly right. It's like, so I spoke to this lady about it. We went through bits, and I said, well, look, yes, that's me, and that's me, and I can't do that, and I struggle with that, and my brain does that. But all of this stuff, which is, this seeing P's and B's backwards and things like that. That's not an issue. And it was her that told me that there is actually no defined definition of being dyslexic. You don't have to tick all the boxes. It can manifest itself in this way or that way. And she said, just speaking to you and going over your experiences, it's very, very clear that you are. If you want to pay £4,000 to have it, on a bit of paper, then do it. But I'm telling you are. But
I think at that point, there's nothing you can do with the diagnosis. I think if you're at school, then it would have helped people around you to understand you better and you'd be able to access learning. But at that point, it helps you understand you and say, okay, this makes sense. I am capable of everything, but there's been reasons why I find it hard to access words.
Well, one of the things I've always hated in life, it's just like I can't do it the conventional way. So what's the cheat? What's the how do I go in a back entrance? How do I
I think that's certainly true of you, though. Anyway, I mean, I think that is. I mean, you didn't have a label then, and nor did you kind of allow any labels to form barriers for you. I think kind of going over barriers and was exactly what you started to do. So you went through school, it sounds like, just sort of kind of keeping your head below the surface, making sure that you weren't getting caught out with anything. And then you made a decision to leave at 15. So does that mean you took your GCSEs? Were you the youngest?
Yeah. No, well, I left school at 15 solely because I was the youngest in the class. So, I mean, there were people taking their GCSEs in my year that would have been turning 17, a month or so later. So, yeah, I don't think it was. I always assumed, like most of my friends, that I'd just go to college, and I pretty much failed all my. The GCSEs is a funny one. When they had one of the first years when they brought in the GCSEs, I think before that you had the CFEs. And it's sort of quite a clear pass and fail. I think you get A, B, and C, and you passed, or anything D, or you failed. The GCSE is a funny system in that sort of no one fails. It's like everyone gets one. You just get one at a terrible grade. It's like
a low fail.
Yeah,
like a low fail.
I'm sorry.
I think it's a low pass.
Yeah, it's exactly right. It's a low pass rather than a fail, So if I was on the previous system, then I would have absolutely failed everything, But it's whereas what I did was just, I got, I think maths was my strongest subject, and I got a D in that. You know, so and it was worse from then. But again, I made some bad decisions with my options. I'd say, when I sat down and thought about them, I remember I sat down with my dad and I chose geography and history. You know, so I wasn't fantastically interested in. History was okay, but geography certainly not. Because I thought that's what I was supposed to do. I thought that's what would be expected of me. And the truth is, you know, I could have picked whatever I wanted, you know, but I did. I don't know why. I felt I did it for other people, rather than for myself, but with no, I should say, with no pressure whatsoever. So when I got my results, and they were terrible. I went to the Civic Centre in Harrow, and they had a careers advisor, you know, and said, "This is what you can do." And I said, "Look, I said I want to do my A levels, but I want to go. You know, I haven't enjoyed any of the subjects, so I picked some subjects that I thought I'd really enjoy, and I thought law was one of them. I think there might have been accountancy and stuff like that." So I picked a couple of A levels. I'd like to do that, please. And they said, "You can't." They said, "You can't. Your grades aren't good enough." They said, "If you want to go to college, you have to resit your GCSEs again." And I said, "You know, in a year's time." And I said, "I don't want to do that. You know, I couldn't stand it." And just the thought of all my friends doing A levels and I'm doing my GCSEs again. So I said, "Well, what other options are there?" And he gave me. I got a job interview for the flagship branch of H. Samuels, which is number 1 Shaftesbury Avenue. So it's the big, right in the middle of Piccadilly Circus, you know, under all the lights. And I went there and got the job, you know. So I worked at the time what was a very, very good wage, you know, because it was open 9 in the morning to 11 o'clock at night. You know, you had shifts and what have you, London waiting, and you know, I went from £2 pocket money, you know, a week to £180 a week.
Wow.
In my pocket.
Yeah, that still sounds like a lot to me.
It was. I remember years and years later, I shared a flat with a girl who worked at H. Samuels, and I was getting more at 16 all those years before than she was then. I mean, it was. Yeah. I mean, within retail, it was known that you were on a very, very, very good wage. And,
I mean, what a change, though. So, I mean, just within a few months, your world must have really shifted. You've left school. You're not doing what your other friends are doing. You've just realised that you can't go and do A levels. Like all the kind of paths which are led out to you. This is what you do, and then you do this, and suddenly this careers advisor says, why don't you go for this job interview? You go, and you're earning lots of money.
Yeah,
that must have felt incredible, because until then you were just trying to stay hidden. You know, you knew you loved your acting, you were trying to stay hidden, and then suddenly you're earning money. So then what happens next? I mean, that must have begun your transformation.
It was a huge baptism of fire.
Yeah.
Again, I was a fish out of water, because I mean, I was the youngest at school, but I was the youngest in this organisation by, you know, the young people there were in their early 20s, you know. The older ones, I guess, are in their 40s and 50s. I'd literally just turned 16, you know, and I was still very much a child. I mean, only a few months ago, I was running around a playground, and now I'm in a suit and having to be professional, and you know, it was a game, you know. I didn't know how to do that, and then of course you've got being British, there's a sort of drinking culture around this, you know, and we're going to go to the pub after work for a pint. Never done that in my life, you know, and just, you know, the whole thing was a change, and I got used to it pretty quickly, but it was It's funny. Just in school, when I was at junior school, I had the 3 junior schools. When I went to high school, I was one of 2 that went to this high school. Everyone else went to Noah Hill or Hatch End. I was one of only 2 in a whole year that went to Whitmore. So again, I had to, when I went to high school, I had to start again, with all new friends. And it was the same here, all my friends at school, that ended then, and had to start again with all these new people.
But you knew how to do it. I mean, that's the thing. You'd already learned really early on, from primary age to secondary age, how to start again, and how to manage the situation itself. Starting again wasn't new to you. So maybe in some ways those experiences made it more possible for you to survive.
Possibly. I'm still very uncomfortable with doing it. I'm still. I did a TV show a few years ago, and I was only in the show for 1 episode, and I did one day's filming. But the show went on for 10, 15 episodes or whatever it was. So the majority of the cast and the crew known each other over 9 months when they were filming this thing. And I went to the wrap party, and everyone's oh darling, and all over each other. And there's me, who literally just the thing I did was to make it worse. The thing I did was to camera as well. So there was only me in the scene doing a monologue to the camera. So albeit I met some of the other actors at lunch in the green room, I didn't really know anyone. And I hid in the toilet for the first hour of that party. I mean, but by the end, after a few drinks, the party was fantastic. And I had wonderful big name people that I really enjoyed meeting. But I still have the anxiety. I'm not comfortable. It hasn't, because I've done it from a young age a number of times. For me, anyway, it hasn't made it any easier. I'm not one of these people that can easily go into a room full of strangers and just say, "Hi, I'm here," and that's never been me. It's just. But having said that, my sister would really struggle, which just wouldn't have turned up. Whereas I'll do it. I won't like it, but I'll do it. And you just have to.
You've learned to do it. I mean,
what choice do you have? Yeah.
I think it's really great to hear you talk so honestly about that. It really is, because I think people just are confident, like it's just something you have, and actually we work at it all the time. And it's really useful for even young people to hear that, because there's so many pictures of just confidence, of people being confident, of people posing, people showing themselves, and actually what you're saying is hugely relatable. Because I mean, the first time I met you, or I don't even know you remember, it was at Harriet's party, but you sort of just came into the room and I was like, wow, that's confidence, tall, and sort of you greeted everybody and you knew how to speak to everyone. And I'm the person that's kind of hiding behind somebody else, doing what you did at school. I do that in social places all the time, like pretending I'm not there. And to hear you kind of go, actually, I still have to work at it. It's really, really important to hear for a lot of us.
It's how confident you are as well. I think if you walk into a room with your friends, or there's people with you and what have you, you've got that backup, haven't you? So you can be this, particularly after a couple of drinks and a night out, you can, you have that sort of fake confidence, I guess. Walking into a room of complete strangers, I don't think anyone is that, be it celebrity or anything else. I don't think anyone is that confident. I think it is all an act to a certain extent. It's of course you have belief in yourself, but I think if you don't second guess yourself or have self doubts, then. You've got probably other issues in you. If you are that confident, then there's
that unaware.
Yeah, exactly right. Then that's a different problem you have. I wouldn't want to admit it.
So you, at this point, you're working at H. Samuel, earning lots of money, and then from there, you then just move into the world of work, don't you? You work for a while, I think.
Yeah, well, I walked out of HSAM. I mean, essentially I got sacked, but I walked out because it was. I'd been there about a year, and it was one of the hottest days in London. The air conditioning broke down, and I used to run the top floor clock department, and it was just unbearable. You know, I said. I just said no, and I walked out, and they said, "Well, you can't come back then." And that was, and I was like, no. With no plan, you know, I didn't know what I was going to do next, and I just started temping, you know. But at that point, I just realised how much money I was on.
Yeah.
Annuals, you know, because and this was a sad thing. You just, as a kid, you just spend it. If you've been given that amount of money, I didn't know what to spend it on. You know, I used to get black taxis everywhere I went. You know, because I could. You know, we you know probably went out to restaurants every single day. You know, and went out every single night.
I mean, I think that's why we should teach stuff like investing at schools. You know, what to do with your finances. That's really useful stuff to know that when you get your first job. You know,
I've always thought so. That's the one thing I was always surprised they never taught at school, and to the best of my knowledge, they still don't. I mean, I know life's moved on, but the bank made a mistake with me when I was 15, and they gave me a checkbook, you know. And I had an overdraft. I had also, you know, all these things I shouldn't have at 15. But it was a real eye opener. You know, if you go over certainly in those days, they charged you a fortune for going a pound over your limit, and balancing a checkbook and things like that. You know, it's because you write a check. And again, in those days, it could take a week or 2 weeks to actually physically come out of your account. So it was very important. You sort of wrote down everything, how much money you got on the account, how much money you were spending. So you didn't get these huge charges if you just went a pound over. And I appreciate, you know, checks are gone for the most part and what have you, but it's the same principle with credit cards or anything in finance. And these rather than trigonometry and stuff like that, I think the life skills of budgeting and working out what you can and can't afford, you know, is hugely important.
But I think the thing which is a real testament to the way you've worked is that you've really learned life skills out living life. Like, you've got real lived experience of that. And, you know, you went on and you were temping and you had jobs and you somehow learnt those lessons about money, though, because you started investing.
Yeah, well, what changed for me, I think, was I was temping for a number of years, but I was I moved out of my parents' house when I was 18 as well, because I've always wanted to be very, very independent. But, you know, certainly my mum was always there as a financial backup. You know, if anything went wrong, you know, it couldn't go that badly wrong because, you know, I mean, mum was working in those days and making good money so she could come and rescue me. What really changed is when I moved to Australia, that was it. You know, if getting work there was, particularly as a Brit, was very, very tough. Very difficult to come by. And if you didn't work, you didn't eat. You know, you couldn't get a hostel or anywhere to stay. You know, so I think that's where the real work ethic came in, and just, you know, literally how many hours can I get? Because you were fighting over shifts for anything. You know, and it was a wonderful time, but to keep that going, and sometimes I was doing very badly, and you know, I remember thinking a Mars bar would be a luxury, you know. And then sometimes I was doing really well-paid jobs and making lots and lots of money and having a great time. But when I came back to the UK, I think that's when something clicked in my head that it's actually nice to have money. You know, it's actually I don't want to. I mean, there were periods where I was, you know, signing on the dole and stuff like that, and it wasn't fun. You know, you didn't have a sense of self-worth doing that. I mean, you certainly didn't have any money, and I just thought, no, there's no cheating the system. There's no. You're not winning by cheating the system, by not working and getting the government to pay for you. So I made a decision then. I want good things. I want to make some money and have a certain. I mean, when I say a certain lifestyle, just enough to buy my own clothes, enough to you know, to not worry so much about you know, what's going to happen next. You know, money in a couple of days, or you know, I'd like to buy that Mars bar, you know, if I wanted it.
That Mars bar, George, but you also have good things and interesting things. Don't you have a Dalek in your front room?
I do. Yes. You see, this is
the wonderful world of George, I think.
Yeah, well, I've always wanted one, and one came up during lockdown, and I sort of regret this, but I think I'm going to go a better one. But I thought no one's travelling in lockdown so he's not going to be able to sell this Dalek. And I had a chap that was working and was allowed to, you know, take his van around, and I thought, well, I'd invest in a Dalek while they were going cheap. But yeah. It was a big part of my childhood. You know, it's funny, you get to a certain age and it's all about retro stuff. You know, I bought only the other week I bought a computer game for the BBC Micro. I don't have the BBC Micro, for the BBC Micro, which they would have had at school when I was 8 or 9. But I remember it was one of my first proper interactions with computers at school, and I remember the game. And the game was one of the first leads in a school play I got. You know, that they based it on this. So I have to have that.
I think to me it sounds like you just have a lot of fun, George. I think, you know, amongst how things have been difficult at school, or you've really had to learn to manage and live, and you've learned really good experiences in between that, you've carried on with the acting, and you've carried on, you know, really finding ways in which things make you happy. You still sound like the kid that's running around in the playground.
Yeah, it pretty much is that. I mean, I was very lucky with the property. It sort of made, you know, a successful business, and that takes a huge weight off. If you're able to take that financial pressure off, you don't have to worry so much about this or that or the other. It helps. But I mean, I've travelled a lot. I mean, I've always enjoyed travelling, and that's my fun. It's funny. When I've had money, I've got no time. And when I've got time and money, you know, and it's been addressing that balance over the years. But I remember one thing that really changed my life was I was constantly getting fired from these jobs for various reasons, and then you think, great, I've got lots and lots of time, but then I haven't got the money, you know. And I remember I was walking in East London after I'd been, I think, fired that day from something or other, and I walked past a travel agent, and they said, "Oh, there's a trip to Tokyo, leaving tomorrow, £150 return." And I was like, "Wonderful! I'll just do that. I'll just go to Tokyo," you know. But I heard my mum's voice in my head saying, "You can't jump on a plane at Tokyo because you haven't got a job, and what you're going to do and what have you." And I thought, "Oh no, I better not." And I regretted it. I really, really regretted it. And the moment, and this is no disrespect to my mum, this is just doing the best for me. It's like, you can't be doing this if you haven't got money or what have you. The day I turned that voice off and thought, hell with it, that changed everything. Because, you know, I decided I wanted my own flat. And I got a job, you know, a good job. And within a couple of weeks, I said to my mum, I'm going to get my own flat. And I'll never forget, she just laughed and laughed and laughed and said, you just got a job and now you want a flat. But yeah, within 3 or 4 months, I did it. And that was important, you know, to say, you know what, it doesn't matter, you know, and just someone said, you know, you don't regret the things you do, just the things you don't do. You know, because even if you do something that didn't work out, it's still an experience. You still learn from it. You can still have a knock-on effect to something better the next time, you know. So yeah, I think just doing things, it's so funny. There's a lot of people that will tell you not to do things because they're afraid of doing it themselves. And I found that over the years, you know, it's I guess I've taken a lot of risks, and for the most part, they've worked out pretty well. But a lot of people will tell you not to do it and play things safe. And I think a lot of those people, particularly within my generation, within my at the time my friendship group or my work colleagues, they'll tell you not to do it and play it safe because that's what they're doing. And if you did take that risk and you did achieve that goal, that will be no good for them, you know, because you did it. Whereas they, albeit they're your friends and colleagues, they perhaps want you to fail because it would validate their life and just say, you see, he tried it and it didn't work out, and that's why this safe, stable path of staying in the same job for 20 years is the best thing. You know, it's not the best relationship, it's not the best job, it's not the best whatever it may be, but you know, it's
I think that's so true what you're saying. I mean, I relate to what you're saying because I'm going through that experience at the moment where I'm leaving a job I was in for 14 years, and that's and for that reason that you're saying, because it was safe. And I stayed there until I thought, I am not having a lot of experiences because I'm trying to keep myself so safe. I'm shut off from what's out there. And what I think is really interesting about your story is you didn't keep yourself safe in that sense, in that regard, is that you lived your life and you went out, and that moment where you said you turned the voice off in your brain, and that's when change started to happen. I think it's just such a testament to what you've managed to achieve and who you are today, because what was set out for you at school and what could have been, had you followed down the path that was expected of people, wouldn't have opened up the doors that are there for you today. So that's so fascinating and so important to hear how you can go from what you experienced to where you are today. And I think, George, your story is just so brilliant. And I'd really like the last words to be from you, from anyone like you who's feeling different at school or feeling that there's other things they want to do. What would you say to them?
It's just having this conversation with you. And by the way, I forgot completely about your job situation. Yeah, it's fantastic. You're taking that stride, and it is the right thing to do. But it's I'd say, only speaking to you today, I've sort of come to realise that perhaps, I mean, for me, leaving the school environment, I got away from people saying, no, that's not good enough. That's not, you're not trying hard. You're not doing that, you know. And you know, going to somewhere completely different, I didn't have those people saying those things. So it was just for me to rely on, you know, and try different things. And you know, I would say to those people that the school system really is a sort of one size fits all. It probably shouldn't be, but it is. But the world is huge and vast, and there's so many different and exciting things you can do. And I think it's up to all of us to find our place and what we enjoy, and to go out and find it, because there will be something there. But I think it's important to know what you want, to know what you enjoy. There was a careers advisor I've always liked this that said to me once that rather than some people are money orientated, for example, and they say, oh, we want to do this job or that job, and train as a lawyer or an accountant or something that pays a good wage. So if you're money orientated, why don't you just look for jobs that have the biggest vacancies? Salaries, big salaries, loads of vacancies, and then just train to be that, if that's what you want to do. If that's not what you want to do, work out what you really enjoy and what jobs have those aspects. But there's no limits. And by the way, and then change your mind a year later, and then change your mind again a year later. There's the world's changing so fast. There is no hard and fast rule about what you should do. I don't believe there is jobs for life anymore. It's what our parents did is it's a very, very different world, and it's a very different world for our children as well. So,
I love that. I love that. Allow yourself to change your mind and then change your mind again. George, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Such a fascinating conversation.
Well, thank you so much for having me.